This is the second part of this manhwa. If you haven't seen the previous chapters, I recommend that you do. The next day, Arion dresses up the protagonist, as the girl says that the queen will visit the outskirts of the city to commemorate the death of the two high-ranking vampires. So, the protagonist and the general say that she is an incredible person, to which the old man adds that she is now the ruler of the city, and he asks the protagonist not to say anything strange to her, as it will be a headache and he must endure it. Some time later, a carriage arrives in the city, and the queen's butler orders everyone to bow before her, the sole heir of the royal family. And everyone does, except the protagonist. She complains about the bad smell and dirt, and the protagonist says it's normal because they are on a battlefield. So, the general hits him to make him quiet. She confuses his name and then approaches to tell him that he is ugly, but due to his body being remodeled. The queen says she ventured into such a dangerous area to praise the achievement of defeating two high-ranking vampires, and her butler praises her for it but says that the exterior is very dirty, so they should continue the conversation inside. There she lets it slip that she is also dirty and asks the protagonist what he wants as a reward for his actions. However, Arion is the one who responds, telling her that they need labor and supplies to improve the protagonist. However, the queen tells her that she didn't ask her, and although she acknowledges her contribution, as the last of the royal family, she is obligated to invest in various possibilities to secure the future. So, the support she already provides is all they will have. The protagonist doesn't understand this, so the general explains to him that it's because she didn't believe in the Dead Knight's plan at first. Then Arion requests that at least those who sacrifice themselves for the plan be officially recognized as heroes. But the queen says that the Dead Knight's project is a secret, so everything related to it must remain that way. And she says that the protagonist's reward will be a title and land, and he must kiss her hand to accept them. But the protagonist says that despite the situation in which he fought alone, they bring a crazy woman who claims to be the queen, so humanity must be doomed. This enraged the queen, when Leonard suddenly enters, saying that a huge guy is approaching the city. Later, the general scolds the protagonist for his attitude towards the queen, but he says he doesn't care because he doesn't want to earn her favor. There, the survivor tells them that his city was destroyed in one day, with a single blow. Then the general sees something, and they realize that it is a colossal vampire heading towards them. Upon seeing its size, the protagonist asks how that can be a vampire, and Arion explains to him that, for a vampire, as long as they have a strong will, they can do anything using blood. So, the name of that vampire must be Miranda, the steel giant. She brought down the walls of the capital and has steel skin that is unaffected by any attack. A vampire with a reputation that overwhelms the girl. But because of being so famous, a lot of information leaked and its weaknesses were studied. So, the protagonist asks what those weaknesses are, but that's when the girl reveals the harsh truth, that the vampire has no weaknesses. The group sets out to confront it, and the girl tells them that they cannot attack it at that moment because they don't know where its heart is, and if it reaches Bahal, the city will be destroyed. However, the girl researched as much as she could about him, and she says that he hides when the sun comes out, changing his form to do so. So, that's the moment when the protagonist must kill him. The general says that despite its speed, the vampire shouldn't reach the city yet. So, it is expected to be hiding near a village with many buildings that is on the way to the city. But if they don't find Miranda there, he will enter the city the next day. The group reaches the village and finds that the trail ends with a giant footprint, so it's certain that he is hiding in the houses. Therefore, Leonard says that the soldiers will start investigating from the south, while the protagonist does it from the north. However, he realizes that they have very few troops, as the queen had most of them constructing weapons. So, they begin the search with what they have, entering and destroying the houses to search every corner. The protagonist says that even with his changed form, the vampire must be enormous, so they should focus on large places. Time passes, and it approaches dusk, but the group hasn't been successful. Arion says that it must be because he is hiding in a way they find hard to imagine. The protagonist gets frustrated because he hasn't managed to find the vampire either when suddenly a loud noise and a shadow catch his attention. So, the protagonist runs after it, and when he corners it, he sees that it is something enormous with fangs like a vampire's. In a scene change, one of the high-ranking vampires informs Julius that the protagonist is a dead knight located in Bahal. So, he asks if he left that city for last, and Julius tells him that's where it all began. Therefore, he tried to organize it one last time, but he believes the time has come. He orders them to destroy the city and bring the protagonist to him. Suddenly, in the village, the group hears a loud explosion, so the general rushes to see if it's the protagonist, and he finds him carrying the corpse of a bear on his back. The protagonist asks if they are sure he is hiding there because he doesn't even know what he's looking for. Then Arion responds that they didn't have time to prepare properly. Leonard wants to burn down all the houses to speed up the search, but the girl warns him that it could cause a fire that spreads to the forest. They continue arguing until the general shouts that he cannot give up because the next battlefield will surely be Bahal, and he will make sure to stop its destruction, so he returns to a place he couldn't check properly before and runs off. This surprises the protagonist, and Leonard tells him it's because the general's family is in the city. He has a daughter he cares a lot about, so he's also going back to search because they have no time left. Night falls in the village, and we see the general checking one of the houses where he says he hasn't found anyone. Suddenly, he hears a sound behind him coming from a small red chest, and when he stares at it, he sees it move slightly. We see the house from the outside when suddenly the roof explodes into pieces as a mass of flesh sends the general flying. Arion and the protagonist witness this, so they rush to help the old man, and the protagonist says he knew that would happen. The general says he found the vampire and that he could have killed him. The protagonist asks him what he's talking about, and the general reveals that when he had the knife in his hand and saw him, he discovered it was a small child. At that moment, the protagonist looks up and sees the vampire grow furious to its maximum size. Then it launches a direct blow towards them. The vampire strikes his fist against the ground, but the protagonist manages to dodge it and protect Arion and the general. The knight asks them if they have any other way to fight, but the general tells him there isn't, and he apologizes for being hesitant when it came to killing Miranda, so the protagonist throws him aside. Then he looks up and sees that the vampire ignores them and continues on his path, so he asks if they are not going to fight. Arion supposes that it's because his top priority is Bahal, and she says that everything will be over if the city falls, so they must prevent him from reaching it no matter what happens. As Miranda crosses the village, he crushes all the soldiers he encounters with his feet. When the protagonist appears on a rooftop carrying a stone pillar, he spins it around and throws it at the giant. However, it does nothing and splits in half, so the protagonist leaps and strikes his skin with all his might. But it doesn't cause any damage, so he wonders if his fist truly cannot penetrate his skin. And he delivers an even stronger blow than before, generating an expanding shockwave that shines as if it were sparking. But it only ends up shattering his hand without even scratching the vampire, who becomes aware of his presence and attempts to crush the protagonist. He dodges it and runs up his leg while saying that there is no one without weaknesses, no matter how big they are, so he is certain that there is a weak point. Then the giant uses his other hand and almost crushes the protagonist, who keeps running until Miranda grabs him by one leg and lifts him in front of his eyes. That's where the knight realizes that his eyes are exposed. But before he can do anything, the vampire uses his fingers to tear him apart. Back in the city, the queen watches as Miranda approaches from the distance, while the guards alert everyone that he is crossing the ocean. The queen says that no vampire is indestructible, and there have been several cases where low-ranking vampires were defeated by ordinary people, so they don't need to rely on the protagonist, whom she calls a repulsive corpse. She asks her butler how the preparations are going, and he responds that all adjustments are complete and ready for launch. She turns around and sees behind her a massive network of giant ballistae. She says that its appearance seems to symbolize the power of a noble royal family, a weapon so powerful and beautiful that it surpasses anything ever made by humanity, with hundreds of giant arrows ready to fly with the tension of 1,000 horses. Surely, they will pierce the steel skin of the vampire, and the moment he falls, everyone will realize that she is the true empress and hero who will rule humanity. So she will show them the power of her great royal family and prove that she is not mistaken. She raises her hand and then forcefully brings it down, giving the order for the ballistae to fire. The protagonist's group follows Miranda's tracks near his footprints, until they find a pile of remains, and the general asks if this is really the last trace, to which a soldier responds affirmatively. The old man approaches, concerned, and asks if these few pieces of flesh are all that remains of their efforts to save humanity. He takes one of them and squeezes it tightly while saying that if he hadn't hesitated at that moment, none of this would have happened. So he apologizes to the protagonist. But then something falls behind them, and they see that it's him, who tells them that he is still alive. Arion and the general are surprised, and the girl runs towards him, telling him that she's glad he's still alive. As they travel back to the city, the protagonist tells them with difficulty what he discovered about Miranda. that his eyes are not covered by skin, so if they can't open his mouth, they should attack his eyes. However, Arion says that it won't be of any use if they don't destroy his heart. So the protagonist says that his plan is not that, but rather to enter the body through the eyes. And the girl says that it could work, but the problem is reaching his head. At that moment, a loud sound catches their attention, and they see that it's the queen's weapon firing at the vampire. It hits him forcefully with overwhelming numbers. The group peers out of the carriage, curious to see if the projectiles manage to do something to their enemy. But they see that he emerged unharmed and only covered his face with a hand to protect it. One of the soldiers informs the queen that the giant did not fall and is still approaching. So she asks her butler about the progress of the next plan, but he doesn't respond. This infuriates her. Meanwhile, Miranda reaches the fortress, and the protagonist's group manages to enter the castle, where the general continues to blame himself for not killing the child. Suddenly, his daughter, named Audrey, appears and embraces him, happy that he is safe. The general asks her why she hasn't evacuated, as he told her to flee when the giant crossed the sea. But she tells him that if she had done that, there would be no one who could rebuild the protagonist. Besides, he no longer needs to worry about her because she is already bigger than him. Then Audrey sees the protagonist and introduces herself to him as the general's daughter, extending her hand. But she apologizes because she forgot that he doesn't have an arm. So Arion asks her to connect all the body parts and provide a 350 type climbing weapon to ascend the Titan. Audrey prepares to do so when suddenly the Titan's leg pierces through the castle, taking the girl and her helpers right in front of the astonished general. The castle stone crumbles, and Audrey falls into the void, but the general manages to grab her hand at the last second. He tells his daughter to hold on and that he will lift her up in a moment, but she says he won't be able to do it because he is old and weak, so at least he should take the torso for the protagonist. But he tells her that she is more important when suddenly the debris he was holding onto breaks, and they both start to fall. So the protagonist jumps, and with only his head and one arm, he manages to cling on and bite the general's arm to prevent their fall. And although the general says nonsensical things, he thanks the protagonist for saving them. Miranda continues to advance, so Leonard and the soldiers tell the people to drop their luggage and evacuate everyone to the outskirts of the island. Then the queen appears and asks the soldier how long he thinks they can hold on. Leonard tells her that at the current rate, he doesn't think they can hold on through the night. So she asks where the protagonist is, and he tells her that his group is preparing to fight the giant in a different way. She says that's it, and everyone is going to die on an island with only one entrance and one exit. And if that happens, then there will be no one left to judge her. So she says it's not a bad thing, turns around, and leaves. The scientists hurry to connect the protagonist, and Arion tells him that he must leave as soon as they finish. The protagonist agrees, and while looking at his new arm, he says it's an incredible weapon and sticks it to the general's head to test how sticky it is. Arion explains that it's based on a lizard's hand, designed to facilitate climbing in slippery places. The general thanks him again for saving them, but the protagonist tells him that it wasn't for them, but to save his body. So the general accuses him of always thinking of himself and says he should have happy moments with someone else. But the protagonist tells him that there is no one else because his parents threw him into the garbage dump. Gladiators tried to kill him, just like the audience who bet money, and there was always someone who wanted to kill him or bring him down, and he only survived by fighting to the end. And he will do the same on this occasion because he will be the one to do it. This leaves the general thoughtful, and then he tells him that's the life of a man with nothing. At that moment, the scientists finish the connection, and the protagonist stands up to go out and fight. When Arion stops him and before he leaves, she tells him that she hopes to see him again tomorrow. To which the protagonist only responds by saying that he finds it funny and leaves the castle ready to face the giant. Terrified, the citizens watch as the imposing vampire approaches, when suddenly it notices the protagonist who starts climbing rapidly up its knee. Once again, it tries to crush him with its hand, but he dodges it and gains momentum to shoot forward, circling around its body to reach the lower back. The protagonist thinks he is safe and just needs a bit more when he sees Miranda's hand manages to grab him, and he is forcefully ejected from its body. The protagonist emerges from the rubble and sees that he has lost a hand, but immediately prepares to try again. With a leap, he returns to the battle in front of the astonished citizens, who wonder what he is. The protagonist runs through the hallway of a building when Miranda's fist appears to strike him, but he evades it and uses the debris to propel himself back into the vampire's body. There, with his new arms, he climbs and dodges his enemy's limbs. However, the vampire manages to hit him again, and before he can recover, it seizes the opportunity to strike him down on the ground and finish him off. The protagonist survives by clinging to Miranda's knuckles, from where he looks at the rubble, and he discovers that beneath the city there is another underground space that seems deep, making him wonder why such a place exists on the island. At that moment, Miranda notices his presence and swings its arm forcefully to send the protagonist flying again, and while trapped in the debris, it strikes him. The protagonist loses a foot but remains focused on the fight, dodging the vampire's attacks, even losing one of his improved arms, until with a furious shout, he manages to reach the area under the nape of its neck, where he says he's almost there and just needs a chance to reach the other side of its eyes. Miranda is about to remove the protagonist from its body when suddenly it notices a silhouette that freezes it for a moment. The protagonist takes advantage of this and with a powerful leap, he manages to rise a few meters above the vampire's head. This causes it to turn its head upwards, and the protagonist lets himself fall at that moment, shouting for it to die, with the hands of his enemy about to trap him. Some time ago, we see a small cloth doll on the floor, which is lifted by equally small hands. We then see that they belong to a child who recounts that he couldn't do anything while a monster knocked down his brother, because it was too big for him, as well as being very tough. Then we see Julius telling him not to worry because in the world he will create with him, there will be no more monsters. So, the child turns to look at him hopefully and smiles. There, we see Miranda's eyes, and the silhouettes he saw belonged to a girl who protected her younger brother, both observing him with fear. This reminded him of his past, which made him hesitate for a moment, and it is then that the protagonist appears to pierce him through his eye before he can stop him with his arms, causing him to disintegrate before the astonished gazes of all the citizens. Amid the fragments of the vampire flying through the air like ashes, the dismembered protagonist appears, walking among the people with the help of a stick serving as a crutch. The villagers wonder what it is, observing his body and considering him a monster, which the protagonist doesn't care about until someone asks him if he is an old man. We see that it is the girl Miranda saw, who asks the protagonist if he is the person who brought down the giant. He only asks her in return what she wants him to do and turns around to continue his path. When the little girl thanks him because he saved her and her brother's lives, and they both express their gratitude. This makes the protagonist pause for a moment and only let out a small laugh before continuing on his way. Back at the castle, Audrey exclaims to the protagonist that he is amazing for being able to fly around without an arm and a leg, so she is sure he was born to be a warrior. She tells him that if he were handsome, she would have built him a statue and maybe planted some hair to celebrate his victory. But her father, embarrassed, tells her to stop making such a fuss. Then Arion appears, putting her hand on the protagonist's shoulder, and says she's glad to see him again. The protagonist asks if that's so because her expression didn't change at all, and she makes a terrifying attempt to smile that only makes him uncomfortable. At that moment, the queen arrives, saying that she feels like everyone is in a good mood, because the protagonist finally brought down the giant, but the damage he caused was severe. Although not as severe as it would have been without her quick evacuation order, but still, all the weapons and the facilities to build them were destroyed. So, it's time to decide who is responsible. And she tells the general that she knows what she's talking about, because she heard that he hesitated at the decisive moment to kill the vampire. He will pay for his mistake with a public execution. Audrey tries to intercede for her father, but the queen refuses. So, the protagonist says that she is responsible for wasting her troops, but still, in public, she is unable to admit that it is her fault, which annoys her when suddenly another vampire appears, who tells her to keep playing queen. This surprises them both when suddenly the vampire decapitates the protagonist before he can do anything, and he says that he is the younger brother of the king, known as the Hound of Belbrick, who, by his promise to Julius, is there to take the protagonist and bring him with him. The queen's knights try to confront the vampire, but like the protagonist, he cuts them in half so quickly that they can't even get close to him. So, he asks them not to waste their lives because he is a true member of the royalty, and he is only there to take the protagonist to Julius as promised, so he won't kill them if they don't get in his way. And he asks them if their lives are worth it just for that head. This convinces the knights, who allow the vampire to pass when he approaches them. Then the queen tells him that she had heard rumors, but now she sees that he truly became a real monster while calling the vampire uncle. He asks her if she will stand in his way for the protagonist's head, and the queen simply closes her eyes and steps aside, letting him pass. After that, the vampire tells her that she makes a lot of noise with her steps and that a true member of the royalty never makes noise when walking. This angers the girl. The vampire leaves the castle and walks among the people with the protagonist's head held high without anyone getting in his way. The general shouts that they must stop him because if he reaches the forest, it will be difficult to track him and fight. The sun is about to rise, so he says they must stop him long enough for him not to enter the forest until then, but they don't have weapons to do it. Then Audrey wonders why the vampire isn't running, and he says it's because the royalty does not run in the eyes of others, which annoys the protagonist. The vampire is about to cross the bridge when someone shouts at him to stop. The protagonist looks up and sees that it is Leonard, who says he will stand in his way for the protagonist's head, because he believes that head is the hope to save humanity. The vampire tells him that all the humans he has known have trampled on and despised other humans, so humanity only harms itself, and he asks Leonard if it is worth giving his life for someone like that. Leonard thinks for a moment, but in the end, he says he believes so because he believes in the goodness of humanity, and that it will not lose its light. Because even though humans harm each other, the important thing is to heal those wounds instead of seeing humans become monsters by their own fault. The vampire says his speech is touching, but in the end, only 5 people believe in that. Leonard tells him that he wouldn't understand and tells the protagonist that just as he saved them before, now they will save him. And they launch an attack against the vampire. Moments earlier, Leonard thanks the soldiers who accompanied him for fighting by his side. They tell him that, although they would follow him to the end, it is a meaningless death, and they are afraid of it. However, Leonard tells them that he is not afraid of dying. He explains to them that their sacrifice will not be recorded like that of great heroes in a story, because they are not generals or kings, but despite how humble they may be, if they have the strength to change something, then it is not a meaningless sacrifice at all. This motivates his men, whom we immediately see severely injured on the bridge floor, and Leonard, who has lost his right arm. The vampire tells him that his actions were arrogant, but he is proud of his courage, and for that reason, he will spare their lives because showing mercy is also a royal duty. The vampire and the protagonist are about to reach the forest, where he says he will finally be able to run, when a last voice behind him tells him to wait, and we see that it is Arion, who says she is willing to fight him. The vampire warns her that he will show no mercy towards her, while the protagonist shakes his head desperately to prevent her from doing so. But she says that without that head, they probably won't have a future, so she will fight to save a man who has fought alone his whole life. The vampire says it's a somewhat romantic phrase, which blushes the girl, but he says he appreciates her will, so he will cut her without hesitation. But before he can strike, the sun's rays dissolve the vampire's arms, and he realizes that dawn has arrived. And we see that the light already illuminates the entire ground except for the shadow of the tree where the vampire is standing. He says that the forest is just 50 steps away, a small step but quite significant. Some time later, the queen arrives at the scene and mocks her uncle, asking him if he's not in a good mood. And she tells him that it's a true royal disgrace that he hides in the shadow of a small tree to survive, when he could have used some low-ranking vampire to cover him. But no one would have followed him, and he wouldn't have let a subordinate do it for him. So the vampire asks her what she will do now. The queen says she is undecided between cutting down the tree or setting it on fire. So the vampire says that's not how the honorable royal family would do it, because he did not kill unnecessarily, and although he could have run, he didn't, thus protecting the honor of the royalty, while she wants to use his weakness to cowardly kill him. Arion tells the queen that she is being deceived because he was trapped in the shadows thanks to the knights who sacrificed themselves, so they must finish him off at that moment. But the vampire offers her an honorable offer as a member of the royalty. We see a flashback of the queen when she was younger, where her uncle calls her pathetic for not living up to royal etiquette, and he says that she is not a true member of the royalty. So we return to the present, where her butler is surprised that she accepted her uncle's offer, and she says that it is to preserve her honor and prove that she is a true woman of the royalty. However, she asks him where he has been all this time, as he disappeared suddenly. He says that he was looking for an escape route for her, but she knows that he was probably hiding. So she warns him that if he does it again, she will rip his arms and legs off. And he says he will keep that in mind with an evil smile. Back with the protagonist's group, Arion informs them that the queen agreed to a duel against the vampire. So Audrey questions how she could do that when they had the chance to kill him thanks to Leonard's sacrifice. Arion says they have no choice, so the general asks what kind of duel will take place. Then we return to the outside where the vampire is, where a warrior named John Byron says he will defeat the monster with that fist as the queen's spokesperson. There, Arion tells them that it is an honorary fistfight duel, where one at a time the contenders punch each other in the face, and the punch can be dodged at the cost of honor, as the one who takes even a single step after being hit loses. Audrey wonders if they are going to make such a significant decision about the fate of humanity with that kind of joke, and the general says that the protagonist's head is at stake, so he still hopes they will win. Arion explains that in a family duel, each side has 4 spokespeople who come out to fight, But since the vampire is alone, they must win just once. Byron thinks he can win because he attacks first. He just needs to knock him down in the first attack. And if he wins the duel, he will achieve a higher rank, even with the possibility of aspiring to the throne. The duel referee reminds the two participants of the rules and starts the match by giving Byron the first hit. He wastes no time and immediately attacks with all his strength. However, although the vampire Belbrick says his punch is fierce, the referee sees that he didn't move a single step. So now it's his turn, and with a single punch, he sends Byron flying, completely twisted and disfigured. The queen expected this, so she brings forward her second spokesperson, named Nicolau Beek, who says that the duel is not only about strength but also about attacking vital points to make the opponent panic. So he unleashes the blow with all his strength, and it seems like he finishes off Belbrick. However, the referee says that he didn't move a single step, and we see that his torso was completely twisted, but his legs didn't move. Nicolau complains about this, but the referee says that the rule is not to take more than one step backward. So Belbrick recovers and strikes the big guy, sending him flying far away and disfigured just like Byron. Then the third spokesperson, named Joseph Rambler, steps forward. He says that he analyzed Belbrick and found a fatal weakness in his patterns, but he also ends up defeated by the vampire. Audrey doesn't understand what they're doing, but Arion tells her that they bet everything on the last spokesperson because it's someone they already know, and we see that it's the protagonist. Belbrick says he can't accept it because now his head belongs to him, but the queen says that they have his body, so they possess a greater part of him to participate. And she will give him back his head anyway if she loses, so the vampire accepts. So the group reconnects the protagonist with his body, and he asks what the hell they are doing if they could have killed the vampire earlier. Then the queen tells him it's for honor, something a man like him would never understand. And he says he doesn't even want to do it. The queen tells him that he will still lose his head if he loses the duel, but moreover, if he wins, she will spare the general's life. So they must prepare for the duel at dusk. The moment approaches, and the scientists attach a new arm to the protagonist. Despite its great strength, he must be careful because it is not durable and can break easily. The protagonist says the color is strange, and Arion tells him it's because it's made from the arms of the spokespersons. Then Arion tells him it's incredible because the protagonist said that his life was the most important, but his body is made of death and sacrifices of others. Then the final duel arrives, and Belbrick smiles because he knew what the queen was going to do. That's why he strengthened the joint of his leg so that it wouldn't move, even if the top part flew away, so there's no way they can defeat him. And he doesn't care if it's a cowardly tactic because he just wants to see her humiliated due to what her father did to him. But then the referee starts the duel, and Belbrick is surprised by the speed of the protagonist. The blow is so powerful that the vampire's head goes flying far away, so the protagonist asks if he won. But the referee says no because the body didn't move a single step, so the game continues, and the protagonist says it's his turn to see stars. While his face recovers, Belbrick thinks he scared him. But now that it's his turn, the duel is over, unleashing his strike and telling the queen in his mind that she will never be able to defeat him. Then we see the protagonist before the duel, where Arion and the scientists place reinforcements on him so he could withstand the blows to the head. But they won't last long, so he must finish the game and win before they fail. Then we see the protagonist receiving the vampire's strike, and the vampire is surprised. The referee points out that the protagonist didn't move a step, so he says it's his turn. And with a swift blow, he once again tears off the vampire's head, causing his body to sway slightly. Belbrick regenerates and charges again, asking the protagonist how dare he. But he still can't make him lose his balance. The butler anxiously asks the queen if the protagonist will be able to win, but she doesn't respond. The protagonist tears off Belbrick's head once again, and with each blow, the vampire loses his balance more, and he realizes that the protagonist is stronger than he thought and can't find a good angle to push him. Therefore, at this rate, he is sure that he will lose. This idea infuriates him because he considers it unthinkable for someone of true royalty to lose against a dirty and unqualified individual. So he tells the protagonist that he is the only one with the courage to be king and the only one fit for the position. The protagonist spits out part of the reinforcements and asks the vampire what he wants him to do. That's when the vampire says that it was the queen's father who took away his chance to sit on the throne again. And he opens his blood armor to reveal his mutilated body, saying that it was the king who cut off his arms. So the protagonist says it's a very crazy family, and Belbrick says he will prove how fake they are by never letting him win. But when he throws the strike, the protagonist dodges it and counterattacks, hitting the vampire directly in the chest. This surprises all the spectators. And finally, Belbrick goes flying, The vampire reproaches the protagonist for daring to do something dishonorable like dodging the strike. But the protagonist tells him it's ridiculous, and although he was considering the general to respect the terms, he couldn't bear it anymore. Bellbrick tells him not to be arrogant when he realizes he can't control the blood, because the protagonist damaged his heart when he struck him. He lifts him by the neck and says they will now fight for real, so Bellbrick tries to make him an offer for the honor of royalty, but the protagonist simply tells him to sleep. The queen panics because she told the protagonist dozens of times not to dodge, and yet he did it anyway. She desperately asks how dare he dishonor the royal family and her. So the butler says that he didn't see that, but he saw how the protagonist endured the strike and then threw a punch that knocked out the vampire. He asks the others if that's what happened, and going along with it, they say it was. Then he asks the scribe how the duel was recorded, so the scribe tears off the page and writes that the protagonist received the strike and then knocked down the vampire with his own. So they say the queen won in an honorable fight, and everyone celebrates her victory. Bellbrick regenerates once again and asks the protagonist how long he will keep beating up a defenseless and armless enemy, to which the protagonist responds until sunrise, so the vampire suggests something. And before the protagonist hits him, he mentions the name Julius. Therefore, the night stops, and Bellbrick reveals that he knows where Julius is hiding, so if he lets him live, he will lead him to him, and then he won't have to fight the rest of the vampires. Only the leader and humanity will win. The protagonist says he doesn't believe him because if Julius dies, Bellbrick dies too, so no one in their right mind would do that. But the vampire says he underestimates the promises of vampires. He only promised Julius to bring him the protagonist no matter what, but what happens afterward is not his concern. The protagonist says it's tempting, but he will decide after beating him up a little more and resumes the beating. Some time later, the chained Bellbrick tells his suggestion to Arion and the others, saying that he doesn't deserve those restrictions because he is of royalty. So the protagonist threatens to hit him again, and the vampire falls silent. Arion doesn't trust him and asks why he became a vampire if he didn't intend to kill all humans. But Bellbrick says he won't reveal it, so the protagonist threatens him again. And the vampire promises that what he will do is lead them to Julius. The group leaves, and Arion says that even though they can't trust him, finding Julius could give them a great advantage. Suddenly, she starts bleeding from her nose. The protagonist says that if they finish Julius, it will all be over, and he's tired of the war. And then the girl faints. The scientists immediately begin treating the girl, who they say has a high temperature and rapid breathing. They remove her clothes so she can breathe better, and the protagonist observes for the first time her superhuman body, which the general says was injected with countless drugs and potions. To detoxify her, they had to add devices that modified her intestines and made her unable to digest food, so she can only eat pre-cooked meals and soups. The protagonist says it's a wonder that she's alive, and the general reminds him that Arion is unique, as it is difficult for a normal human to survive like this. The protagonist asks what caused her to collapse, but the general responds that he doesn't know apart from her temperature, and he asks the protagonist if he was worried about her, to which he replies that he wasn't. But if she dies, he will die too, so he must do whatever it takes to keep her alive. Some time later, the scientists say her breathing has returned to normal, although they haven't found the cause of her fainting, so they can only wait. Then the protagonist realizes that even though they are plugged in, they are not receiving any power. The general scolds him for not plugging her in while she was unconscious, but the protagonist asks if he was supposed to wait for her energy to run out. The general explains that the energy can only flow when she is completely at rest, and it is limited if the person is out of shape or moving vigorously. So Arion is not producing enough energy for the protagonist, and he will have to stay in his current body to avoid losing more. But the general warns him that even that may not work, as if it gets worse, he could lose energy even when connected. And the protagonist says that a slow death like that is even worse than becoming a vampire, since he can't fight or move. The general asks him to take care of the girl while they mobilize their resources to find a solution, and the protagonist reluctantly agrees. Time passes, and the protagonist says there is less than an hour of energy left. Arion complains a little and starts sweating, so the protagonist wipes her with a cloth. There, he realizes how small her face and features are, even her hands. And as he holds one of her hands, he wonders why such a small body can endure so much pain. Just then, Audrey enters with a bucket of water to clean up, and she sees the warrior holding the girl's hand. She apologizes for barging in without warning and then runs out while shouting that the protagonist is holding Arion's hand. Night falls and the fever doesn't decrease, so the protagonist clasps his hands together and begins to pray, saying in his mind the same words she said to him, that he hopes to see her tomorrow. But when morning comes, the protagonist becomes angry that she hasn't woken up despite his pleas, and he sees that the energy is decreasing even though they are connected. So the general says he has no choice but to start developing a new enhanced human. The scientists take Arion and the protagonist down to a basement, where he comes across a plaque filled with names. The general explains that they are all the ones who attempted and failed to become enhanced humans. The protagonist remarks that it's a shame they are in the basement. The scientists say that the materials are ready to create an enhanced human, so the protagonist asks why only one. The general explains that it's because they need many materials, and they only have enough for one person. So the protagonist asks who it will be, and the general says that this time he will do what he has to do and won't escape, revealing that he will be the one to become the enhanced human who saves him. The general says it shouldn't take long, but the protagonist asks what will happen if he fails to become one, to which the old man simply replies that he will make it work. When the scientists arrive and take him away, he asks the protagonist not to tell his daughter. Moments later, the general rides on the stretcher with blue veins, and the scientists explain that the drug injection was successful, and they will soon move on to the second phase. The protagonist asks the old man how it feels to be blue, and he responds that it's neither good nor bad, but they started well. With little energy left, the general gets up and reveals to the protagonist that Audrey is not his biological daughter. This surprises the protagonist. The old man tells him that he lost everything when the mercenaries betrayed him, and he was slowly dying on the street, when a little girl, whose parents had abandoned her, offered him half of her last piece of bread. This act made the general grateful to them as they allowed him to become her father, and it was thanks to her that he could recover from the injury inflicted by another human being. And he tells the protagonist that this is the way to find someone who helps him heal, and he hopes the protagonist can find that. Then the scientists arrive and take the general away to continue with the second phase. As the protagonist runs out of energy, he wonders what is more valuable than surviving. One of the scientists approaches the stone, and we see that in the end, they engrave the name of the general. Then we are told that the general, who became an enhanced human, survived for 12 days. Although it was considered a failure, for 12 days he provided energy to the protagonist, not knowing if it was a miracle or sheer willpower. And on the 11th day, another event occurred, as that night Arion regained consciousness. And although she was very weak, she regained her strength and could produce energy the next day. But after seeing her wake up, the general's health suddenly deteriorated. And in his final moments, he thanked his daughter for giving him hope in that cruel and merciless world. There, we see the memories of the old man, from when he started taking care of Audrey to when they found a house to live in, and the girl had her first partner, saying that it was very beautiful as he fades away and sheds a tear. It is mentioned that Audrey did not cry in front of her father, as she said it was his choice to keep the protagonist alive until Arion woke up, and she would have done the same. But after the old man's death, a silent lament could be heard from his house every night. Some time later, Arion and the protagonist talk about how they must leave to search for Julius the next day, because Belbrick says there are only a few weeks left until everything ends. The protagonist says that everything is calmer than he thought, as the general was alive, dead, and bald. And Arion says that if he hadn't been so determined, they wouldn't even have been able to start the Dead Knight project. And the protagonist says it's nice to see her again and asks her not to faint again, to which the girl smiles at him. At night, the protagonist takes care of Arion when he sees someone approaching the door, and when they enter, he sees that it's the queen's butler, whom he stops with his sword and questions what he's doing there. But he explains that he's not there on the queen's orders. First, he expresses his condolences, as he says he also owed a debt to the general several times. The protagonist admits that he acts differently when he is by the queen's side, and the butler takes it as a compliment, saying that location makes the man. And he says he heard that they are leaving the next day, but there is someone who is eager to see the protagonist. He says that he will then wake up Arion to accompany them, but the butler tells him that only he should go. The protagonist reminds him that if he loses energy, they can only move for 2 hours, even less if they have to fight vampires. And he asks if the person the butler wants to take him to is more important than the destiny of humanity. To which the butler replies yes, as that person is more important than humanity and history itself. A king of kings, an ancestor of humans, and he asks if the protagonist isn't curious to know what is happening between vampires and humans. The pair begins to descend through the catacombs while the protagonist says that he has only seen a fool call himself a king. The butler tells him that this one is different, as he is someone who has guided humanity and embodies the truth itself. The protagonist asks if he isn't talking about the queen, but the butler says he's taking the joke too far. He asks if the queen seems like someone who can lead them, This pleases the protagonist, who tells him it's a funny shit. Then they reach the end of the staircase and find what appears to be a palace. The butler explains that it is an unprecedented underground chamber in history. It was created with countless precious materials and has complete air circulation, as well as drinking water, and rooms for hundreds of servants and caretakers. And the city of Bahal was originally built to sustain the chamber, a place where all the kings of the past descended just before their deaths to live forever, called the Paradise of Kings. Then the butler guides him through the corridors until they reach what appears to be an execution machine. The protagonist asks what that is, and the butler tells him that's where Julius was tied. He explains that normal vampires need human blood to survive, but pure-blooded vampires don't. They didn't need to eat and live forever, so they were magnificent creatures like something out of a myth. And they discovered a surprising fact about them, which is that the blood of a pure-blooded vampire is what powers humans. And we see one of them, an elderly one, drinking the blood and suddenly becoming young. So the butler tells that it was possible to live forever if they kept drinking it. But the blood evaporated as soon as it left the body, so they needed it fast and fresh. That's why Julius was tied to the machine, and the axe would decapitate him constantly to make the blood flow. This gave humans blood for almost 1,000 years and allowed them to enter the greatest era of prosperity in history, unifying all forces, politics, and administration. Earthly kings could only attend at the edge of their death, and depending on how well they had ruled, they were granted the blood. So they had to do everything possible to create a great kingdom. And he says it was all thanks to the country's first king, called Sabuso. However, the protagonist says that something is wrong, and that's why they are at war. Then the butler tells that 41 years ago, a human freed Julius and fled with him. As a result, the underground kingdom began to crumble, and the humans there died in horrible ways, as if their years of life were taken away all at once, dying in the order they drank the vampire's blood. However, King Sabuso survived, and the butler tells the protagonist that it's time to meet him and confront himself. The protagonist enters the room where King Sabuso tells him that he has been observing him for a long time. To the one on the edge of life and death, the dead knight, he welcomes him to his palace. The protagonist tells him that he is very ugly and says he must be very idle to be a great king if he has been observing all the time. The king says that he not only records his life but that of many others, from where they were born, the lives they led, to how they died. That is his power in that kingdom. The protagonist calls him a pervert and asks why he called him if he knows everything. Then the king takes a book and tells him it's Jezebella Hound's life. She could have been a great queen but gave up that destiny after freeing Julius and disappearing together. So the book remains unfinished, and it is his wish to complete it, so he asks the protagonist to ask Julius what he promised Jezebella. The protagonist says that what Julius wants is to kill all humans because he would hate them too if they had chained him for almost 1,000 years. But the king says that hatred is a human emotion that a pure-blooded vampire who has existed for so long does not possess. And he says that Julius wants to kill humans because he made a promise to Jezebella. However, he finds the protagonist's story more interesting, and he tells him that in his final moments, he will make the decision to live or die, to be a human or become a monster, so he is very curious to know how his story will end. The next day, the protagonist puts on his armor and asks Arion if she slept well. She says yes and asks if something happened, but he tells her nothing except that she snored too loudly. Arion says that Julius won't know where they are as long as they have Belbrick, but they must make sure to move quickly and not draw attention. The protagonist considers it a risky bet, but Arion says it's riskier to turn Bahal into a battlefield. Outside, they meet Audrey, who tells them they are ready to leave. The protagonist notices that she cut her hair and asks about the vampire, who is inside the carriage, annoyed that they treat him this way despite being of royalty. But the protagonist threatens to hit him, and he falls silent. And after confirming that they are ready, the group sets off. There, the protagonist remembers the words of King Sabuso, and sighs as he thinks about the choice he will have to make. And that's how the second part of this manhwa ends. If you've reached this part of the video, let me tell you that you have been one of the few people to make it here, so comment the word night in the comments. Remember to subscribe to not miss any videos. That being said, see you in the next video.